Hi there, my name is Dermot McGuinne, and I was very pleased to have been asked to come along today to participate in this very, very important, I would suggest, discussion. Now, placed just before Mike's reflectional roundup, being last to present after such a fascinating range of topics poses, I hope you'll accept, a particular challenge. But I'm delighted that we have held onto our numbers. I suspect it's more to do with the quality of the previous speakers than to any anticipation of what I might say. You see, as a typographic practitioner of the past, and more recently a researcher into its history, like a number of earlier speakers, with a foot firmly in each camp, I'm quite unsure of where I fit in. But perhaps in this context, that's not a bad thing. Now, after graduating from Indiana University in the late 60s, I worked as a graphic designer, initially at the University Publications Department, and later for a number of years as art director of the University of Iowa Press. Now, through its Writers' Workshop program, the press at Iowa sponsored a number of prestigious book awards. The prize, in addition to its monetary value, involved the publication of the winning entry. It needed to be designed, and that, in addition to my other design duties, is where I came in. Now, I'll not subject you to a display of this work, unless I sense a huge wave of disappointment emanating from the floor. But suffice it to say that despite what David said earlier about academic presses, this, in my opinion at least, provided the opportunity to produce highly challenging, exciting, and diverse design work. If you can imagine, 1970 found me rubbing Letraset onto ping pong balls in order to get a particular distorted effect that I know now can be done at the click of a button. Now, Iowa City shares with Dublin and a small number of other locations the UNESCO designation of City of Literature, while the University of Iowa remains one of the premier centres of book arts in the US today. And I was privileged to be associated with its early development over 40 years ago. It was not till 10 years later, through my research interest in the Irish character printing types, that I developed a heightened awareness of the quality of book arts work produced in the past in this country. I discovered how George Petrie in the mid-19th century, in the absence of any significant tradition in type design here, or indeed any personal specialised experience, designed a printing type, shown on the blue background here, that compared favourably with the best anywhere, and contributed to the design of the Annals of the Four Masters, the Annals, to give it its full title, The Kingdom of Ireland by the Four Masters, arguably what was the most significant set of volumes produced in this part of the world at the time. Now, Petrie was not just a fair-weather book person, for in addition to designing type, he directed layout and provided many illustrations himself. And with an attention to detail that would bewilder even the most conscientious book or proofreader, he checked every page of his many publications as it came off the proof press. It's even suggested that he instructed Gill of the college press in the skills of fine printing. So it's both surprising and no wonder at the same time that Gill held him in such high regard. Now, not alone did he design this uncial-based round type, but when John Henry Newman sought an Irish type for his Catholic University press, on advice it was to Petrie that he turned to provide the necessary design. This time modelled on the narrower, more angular, minuscule style, shown here at the bottom of the slide. This style has previously been referred to as the Keating Society type, and I'm very pleased to have been the one who discovered the association with Newman and the Catholic University Press, and consequently, as in conforming with the tradition, renamed that typeface the Newman type, and it went on to be the model for many very popular typefaces in the Irish style that followed. 100 years later, these two type styles became the focus of attention for a person who was arguably one of the greatest exponents of book arts that we have seen in this country, Colm O'Loughlin of the Three Candles Press. And can I suggest, how more elegant can you get by this then shown in this, what became his personal logo, if you like, with the three dots indicating his Three Candles Press. Now, book arts, as we know, can incorporate a wide range of activities. It's about literary authorship, editing and all that implies. It's about binding, paper making, type design, typography, graphics, illustration in its many forms, photographic, reprographic techniques. It's about letterpress and other various printing methods. It can also be, as we know, about conservation, restoration, and not to leave out the very important librarians, about librarianship also. Remarkably, I would put it to you, without exception, by all of these criteria, O'Loughlin was a book arts person. Indeed, when being conferred with his honorary doctorate from the National University of Ireland, the citation rightly identified him as one who demonstrated an equal and exceptional sensitivity to both the contour and content of the book. In his article, Book Production in Ireland, he gives an insight into the philosophy that influenced him as a printer. And it might be of interest if I give you just a little part of his manifesto. He said, "In Ireland, as elsewhere, I feel that the creative printer must turn his back on the over-decorated book and strive for austerity by use of good classical typefaces to produce a satisfying and elegant book. He must beware of the introduction of heavy display lines in titles, prelims, or chapter openings." I'm not sure that many of our younger type designers that came before me here would agree with all of this, but he continued, "Many a book set in well-chosen body faces," he mentions Perpetua, Caslon, Garmond or Baskerville, "have been entirely marred by this lack of unity. Serenity should be the aim of the book designer, and, except perhaps on the dust jacket, no strident jarring note should be struck." I've heard him say this on tape, and I tend to fall into an O'Loughlin voice at this stage, which I've tried to resist. A judicious choice of typeface to suit his paper and his subject, a careful planning of measure and depth of page, a restrained treatment of prelims, followed by care in the bindery, will still produce, in the hands of the true craftsman, a book worthy of our best tradition. Now, furthermore, he advertises bindery service with the exhortation, "A good book deserves to be kept and cherished. How better can you show your love for a book than by treating it to a new suit?" We, referring to the Candle Press, we hold the silver medal and the Royal Dublin Society of the Royal Dublin Society and the silver and bronze medals of Éanach Tailteann. And referring to a connection with the Cooler Press, with whose reputation O'Loughlin liked or was pleased to associate himself, he claimed to have many of the original designs and all of the tools and appliances of Eleanor Kelly, who had been the binder at the Cooler Press prior to that part of the business being discontinued in 1914. Now, another aspect of O'Loughlin. His first contribution to the highly regarded journal The Irish Book Lover was in 1920, When Seamus O'Cassid took over the editorship in 1928, O'Loughlin became its publisher, and he printed it at the Three Candles Press. He assumed editorial responsibility himself in 1930, and concluding his editorship in 1957, he commented, "In bringing to a close this 32nd volume of IBL, I thank all who have helped Seamus O'Cassid and me since we took it over in 1926. I have only succeeded in printing 16 volumes in 30 years. There were many difficulties, lack of materials, lack of money, and the book lover never paid and never took advertisements. Many a time I had to fill a number almost unaided. But I do not regret having carried it on. It gave me a certain joy in the making." After a couple of years that elapsed, Liam Miller of the Dolman Press launched the Irish Book, and he declared that it was a deep regret that the Bibliographical Society of Ireland learned a few years ago that Mr. Colm O'Loughlin felt unable to continue publication of the Irish Book Lover. Our ambition in launching its successor is to achieve, so far as possible, the high standard of gracious learning which Mr. O'Loughlin set so consistently. Indeed, Miller acknowledged the influence of O'Loughlin on his own bookwork. And I think there were only 2 volumes of the Irish Book that were produced. Now, according to Chalmers Trench, who worked for O'Loughlin, Colm was a leading Irish authority and practitioner in typography and print design. He said, "Any job going through the plant in which that's O'Loughlin, took a personal interest was sure to be of a high standard, and even in the general run of commercial work, which was the company's bread and butter, we had the reputation of being the best printers in Dublin." And indeed, this is a sentiment shared by many of his competitors in the print business. However, among his many contributions to book arts, his achievement in typeface design deserves special mention. As a publisher, printer, and Irish language enthusiast, he was particularly interested in the appropriate form for printing Irish text. In the late 20s, he was outspoken in his criticism of the popular Newman-based fonts, which we saw earlier, designed by Petrie. He argued for the production of a modern new round face to include bold, italic, and small caps, heretofore unavailable in the Irish style. As a printer, he stated, "I revere tradition in all things, yet I hold no brief for the present Gaelic type. I consider it one of the worst of 20 Gaelic typefaces ever used. It's spiky and patchy. It's lacking both in grace and dignity." End quote. Now, this comment prompted a response from the Monotype Corporation, which in turn led to Stanley Morrison becoming involved. In pursuing his typographic goal, he worked as an equal with the Austrian type designer Victor Hammer. In a seemingly rather casual account, he described how he had adjusted Victor's Hammerschrift font so that it could be used for printing Irish. He redesigned the A, B, D, G, and T. He added vowel accents and aspiration marks for B, C, D, F, G, M, PST. He crossed to London and spent the night with Hammer at the Austrian embassy. This is his account of it, where they considered and approved his adjustments, resulting in his Bohine type. And in this slide, the top section of the type alphabets shows Hammer's uncial, Hammer uncial, and below that the adjusted version, which O'Loughlin called his Bohine type, after Bohine, who was Columkill's disciple. I think in some grand gesture he suggests that Columkill told Bohine to finish off some project just as I had finished off the project for Victor Hammer. Now, the image on the left might be of interest to type designers. It certainly wowed me when I came to possess it, because it shows the sketches that O'Loughlin made in making these adjustments. And it's almost as if they were contrived, but they weren't. But they're literally on the flap of an envelope and on a scrap of newspaper, where he shows us how he changed the T, the A, and G. Later, in developing his column kill type, he worked with one of the most highly respected type critics of the time, Stanley Morrison of the Monotype Corporation, who in turn engaged Eric Gill to work on the project. And here we see Gill on the left, and in the middle a sheet of drawings prepared in Gill's typical fashion, with pasted in adjustments and whiteout used to make alterations to the letters. These were based on drawings sent over by O'Loughlin, which were done by a young employee at the Three Candles called Carl Ulliman. And below we see the synopsis of the time of the column kill type. Now, by the end of the 1920s, Morrison had already gained an international reputation as a leading typographic authority. He could be very particular about how he permitted others to address him. James Moran, in a commemorative issue of the Monotype Recorder, explains how even Lord Beaverbrook was eventually permitted to use his first name, Stanley, what Morrison protectively referred to as his handle. Now consider on the slide some of the salutations that passed between Morrison and O'Loughlin in their more than 250 letters of correspondence, which were mostly, if not all, but mostly to do with the development of column kill type, which, as far as my limited reckoning goes, it makes column kill one of the most discussed typefaces between the designer and Monotype, the manufacturer. Now, taking advantage of this friendship, which he skillfully led Morrison towards the realization of his goal of producing his type, and on occasion he had to be quite forceful with him. At one proofing stage he commented critically, "The redesigned capital B seems quite satisfactory, but the new D is wrong entirely, and I do not know where you got it. Whatever else is done or not done, this D must be cut right before we proceed any further." Now, I suggest there were not many clients who spoke in this manner to Stanley Morrison. Printed in his Boheen type, O'Loughlin paid tribute in this memorial to yet another giant of type design, Rudolph Ha, who, together with his son Paul, valued column as a true friend in type. The sentiment he expressed says something about Column's own sense of priorities. It says, "May the light of God shine on the noble soul of Rudolph Ha. His memory lives in the hearts of his disciples, who gained from his teaching a vision of the nobility of handcraft, the duty of the craft worker, the beauty of the world, and the mystery of eternity." I don't know, I've talked to employees of the Candle Press, and I think there may be one or two here, but they do acknowledge that he had a certain spiritual realization that led him as an employer. Column, in fact, developed a practical understanding of the basics of printing through his early participation in his father's print business. He brought a refinement to his work through his admiration of the craft of William Morris, on which he wrote a lot. He developed a heightened design and fine print awareness through his experimentation in print, initially in his candle press and later at the Sign of the Three Candles. But most significantly, as is shown in this slide, through his extensive interaction with the best practitioners in Europe, with whom he maintained regular contact over the years. And any type designer who's just a little bit on in years, or book producer, will recognize the names of these people shown in this wood wood engraving as being, of that time, the 20s, 30s, the gurus of book production in Europe. And his correspondence continued with them throughout his life. It was a sign, in fact, of the high regard in which O'Loughlin was held abroad, that when Hermann Zapp prepared a compilation of international typographic examples for his second edition of his Manual Typographicum, he invited Colm to participate. In 1964, reminiscing on his many book friends, Colm declared, "Now my only correspondent in Germany is Hermann Zapp. He's a great type designer, a worthy successor to Rudolph Ha. He tells me he has in gestation a second Manual Typographicum, for which he desires a few paragraphs in Irish and English set in my Columkill. He shall have them. For my design is one more link in the chain that stretches back to the 7th century, when learned Irish monks and scribes brought faith and culture, art and script to eager Germany." I hope they remember that over there. I'll conclude just without any comment on a compilation of some of the booklets and leaflets that Colm prepared, which I think are perhaps examples of his best work. He obviously also produced larger books. Thank you.